Hi everybody, it's Jay and I am back in the booth again for another sneak peek preview and live reading for this week's new release here on Say with Jay. Our new audiobook coming out this Friday is Cowboy Wanting Everything. It's the 10th book in Jessie Gussman's Coming Home to North Dakota Western Sweet Romance series. And before we get into the preview and a live reading in just a bit, in this series, as you probably well know by now, Jessie has been including a dish within the plot of the story, and I've been cooking it for you. And we're going to do that again today in another segment of Cooking with Jay. This time, we're cooking a dish that's a tiny bit out of season, at least name-wise anyway. It's called Christmas chicken. No idea how it got this name. In fact, it's, and full disclosure, this isn't like a family recipe of mine or anything like that. I don't ever recall having this or anything quite like it growing up, but it certainly fits on the table any time of year. And it's surprisingly easy to make, at least with respect to how wonderfully delicious it is. So, without further ado, let's get started making Christmas chicken. So, here are your ingredients for Christmas chicken. As always, no need to copy down the ingredients or try to catch the amounts as I'm giving them to you. I'll list it in the description of this video down below. You may have to hit show all to see it, but it'll be there. So you're going to start with chicken, of course. I'm using boneless, skinless chicken breasts. I think that probably works the best, but you can use, I don't see why you couldn't use whatever you have. You need butter. The original recipe that I have called for a half a stick of butter. I don't think you need that kind of negativity in your life, so I'm using a whole stick, but in 2 halves, as you'll see. Spices are fairly simple. You just need salt and pepper, garlic powder, and paprika. You'll also need breadcrumbs. I like using the seasoned ones, but, you know, whatever you like, you do you. You need 1 sweet onion, and you're going to dice that. You also need a can of cream of chicken soup, 1 cup of heavy cream, and a cup of cheddar cheese. And that's it. Not a lot of ingredients for this. So your first step is going to be to season your chicken. You're going to want to season them liberally on both sides with the seasoning. Start with your paprika, and true story, literally minutes before I started recording this just now, I saw a video with celebrity chef Nigella Lawson, and she called it paprika, and I cannot get that out of my head now. So wherever you are on the globe, you want to use your paprika or paprika and season liberally. You're going to do the same with your salt and pepper and garlic powder, and you want to rub the seasoning into the chicken really well, and then you're going to let that sit for a few minutes. By the way, for anyone who's concerned, I did go back and wipe down all these containers with an antibacterial wipe since I was touching raw chicken and then using my bare hands and touching these containers because, you know, cleanliness is next to godliness and far from salmonella. I think that's how that goes. Anyway, you can go ahead at this point, while the chicken's resting, if you like, and preheat your oven to 350 degrees, and this might be a good time to go ahead and dice up your sweet onion. You're going to want to melt your butter, a half a stick, into a skillet over medium-high heat. You're then going to dredge your chicken in all-purpose flour. Sorry, forgot to list that in the ingredients up front. And then you're going to just simply lay your chicken into your skillet with butter. You're only trying to brown each side, so it's only going to cook for, anywhere between 2 and 4 minutes, depending on the heat of your skillet. You're not trying to cook the chicken through. We're going to bake it in a bit, so you're just trying to brown the chicken, get it nice and golden and crispy. About 2 to 4 minutes each side. Depending on the size of your skillet and how much chicken you're cooking, you most likely will have to do this in 2 batches. That's why I use the 2 half sticks of butter. As you finish each batch of chicken, just lay it into a baking dish that will hold all of your chicken. Once you have your chicken finished, or as I'm doing here since I had room in the skillet, you want to go ahead and start to saute your onion. You really only want to saute it enough to soften the onions a bit. While your onions are sauteing, in a saucepan, mix your soup, heavy cream, and cheese, stirring that occasionally until the cheese is nice and melted. So when your onions are done, your sauce is ready with the cheese nice and melted and it being nice and bubbly, you're going to want to spoon your onions over the chicken. Then you take your sauce and pour that over the onions, gently to leave the onions on top of your chicken. Then you top everything with breadcrumbs. Finally, you're just going to bake for 45 minutes to an hour or until that internal temperature of your chicken is 165 degrees. It'll vary depending on the thickness of your chicken breasts. Once it's done, this is Christmas chicken. Look at that, and I promise you it is every bit as delicious as it looks. It is perfect for a great weeknight meal. It's quick to assemble, and your family is gonna love it. And that is how you make Christmas chicken. I really hope you will give this recipe a try. If you do, let us know how it goes in the comments. All right, let's talk a little bit about Cowboy wanting everything. Cowboy wanting everything is the story of Thaddeus Hart. He's a Minneapolis billionaire, and one morning, he and his fiancée are visiting the huge convention center downtown that his company owns, and while he's there, he has a run-in with a woman who's attending a homeschooling convention taking place there. It's not really an argument exactly, but he's struck by her strength and her strength of conviction and her character, and also her deep emerald eyes. And he notices before they part the name on her attendee badge, Lavender Baldwin. Now, fast forward 5 years, and we find Thaddeus in a very different place in his personal life. His fiancée/wife has left him for another man. And as he's meeting new people, he finds himself constantly comparing them to this woman that has just stayed stuck in his head over these years and finds them lacking. He decides to take a vacation, essentially. He looks up Lavender Baldwin, a fairly unique name, and decides that if he can just go and be around her, work around her for a while, he'll very quickly realize that she's not this ideal that he's built up in his head, and that she's just like every other woman, and he can get back to his life and get on with rebuilding his personal life. Well, what happens when he finds out, once he gets to Sweetwater, North Dakota, that Lavender Baldwin is anything but your average woman? You'll have to come back this Friday to find out. But for now, here's a live reading from Cowboy Wanting Everything. Hope you enjoy it. Then come back and see us this Friday here on Say with Jay. I think that must be him now, Miss April said as they took the last angel food cake out of the oven. They had 15 already wrapped and ready to take to the restaurant in Rockerton. Once these two cooled, they'd be the last. Would you like me to check and make sure that Darby and Zara have their homework done? I was hoping you'd let him in while I go check on them, Miss April said, her brows lifted and her mouth turning down just a bit. I can. It's important to me that you like him and get along with him. You'll be working with him, and your family has hired hands for years. You have more experience than I do, and if there's anything that he needs to be trained to do outside, you're going to have to do it. Lavender nodded. This wasn't the way hiring was done at normal companies, but they were hardly a normal company. Do you mind answering the door and making him feel welcome while I go get the girls settled? Lavender almost laughed. Now she was making him feel welcome? She supposed that they never really had visitors, but it felt a little odd that Miss April was asking her to let the new hire in and make him feel welcome. She didn't have time to think about it, though, because Miss April had barely disappeared when a knock sounded. She walked over, opening the door. Hello, come in. She managed to talk, but she'd never really had anyone take her breath away before. This man certainly did. He looked rugged in worn jeans, with a scruff of beard and hair long enough to be messy, but which didn't cover his ears. He was holding a cowboy hat in his hand, with a bag in his other. All of his clothes looked like they were past their prime and could use an upgrade. I assume you're Thad Hart, the man Miss April was thinking about hiring? The man hadn't moved. In fact, his mouth hung open, and he stared at her like she had a nose coming out of her armpit. Are you okay? She almost put her hand over her mouth. She hadn't meant to ask, but his expression hadn't changed and he seemed astonished about something. Yes, ma'am, he finally said, his voice sounding rusty like maybe his throat was tight, or maybe he was just nervous. You can come in. She had already invited him in, but he hadn't moved. I have these, he said, holding up the bag he held. Quilts from the Peacemakers, for the kids. Okay, she said, stepping back and wishing he'd just come in already, instead of standing at the door acting like he hadn't been invited into a house in his life and was used to staying in the cattle pen. I know it's not common for the hired hands to be in the house, but we don't stand on tradition here. The farm is small enough that anyone who works here feels like family. We're not one of those big conglomerates. She smiled as she said it. She didn't have any problems with ranches that were big enough to need scores of workers, but that just didn't describe them. Yeah. He seemed to stumble, like he hadn't realized he was supposed to be uncomfortable for that reason. But that was silly. He was probably used to working at big ranches and expecting to go to an office instead of the kitchen when he showed up for an interview. Except, hadn't Miss April said something about not knowing how much experience he had? Miss April's going to give me a hard time for letting the door hang open. Are you going to come in, or do you want me to step outside on the porch with you? Oh, I'm sorry. He stepped in quickly, and she shut the door behind him. Miss April is getting her granddaughter settled so we can have some privacy to talk. I'm Lavender. She held out her hand, and he stared at it. He held his hat in his right hand, the quilts in his left. After a few seconds, he seemed to shake himself, setting his hat back down on top of his head in order to free his hand to shake hers. She was so taken by something. Something that she couldn't name. Something that felt like she knew him before, although she was sure she'd never seen him around town, and she never went anywhere. But it pulled at her so strongly, she almost didn't notice how soft his hands were. Miss April hadn't known the half of it. She'd bet this man had never worked on a ranch in his life before. Hi, this is Jay, and thanks for listening. If you're ready for another great audiobook, here's one we think you might like. Or check out the playlist with all our latest releases. Don't forget to subscribe to Say with Jay, give this video a thumbs up, and tell us what you liked in the comments.